And today we are delighted that we have, as we speak, we have signed the LOI, which I will hand over to Francois one more time so that we don't lose it. So we have an LOI that we have signed now today with an intention of working together, developing new programs, hopefully together, and many more things that we want to do together, more so from the specific interest in India. GARPI has a very specific interest in India to work through the ecosystem holistically, and something that we are very happy about. And today, since both of them are here, they are visiting Bangalore, I think we want better than to also have innovators come here and hear GARP's efforts in person. And hopefully after this, we'll have a high tea of sorts with Indian cookies along with that to ensure that there is a one-on-one informal chat happens.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I think, and I request Subha, who is possibly going to share about the efforts, and Francois, who is going to share about the efforts all together. But before we do that, I just wanted to say that if we can have a one-line introduction together today of everyone, one line at max, including from online. So it will be a very good interactive session so that doesn't become one-liner. So I'll go first. I'm Taslim Arif Sayed. I work at CCAMP as director and CEO. I think that'd be good. Can we go?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Mayas, and I work for the Foundation for Neglect Disease Research. So we work for neglect diseases, TB, and various bacterial diseases.
I'm Sanjeevan Banerjee. I run a company called Adgenix Life Sciences, and we are developing new class of biologicals for AMR, to tackle AMR.
Hi, my name is Paresh. I am part of CCAM's in-house R&D team. I lead the scientific operations for a team called Discovery to Innovation Accelerator, where we work on different academic ideas which have industrial potential in various ways.
Thank you, Francois, and Subha. I will do the job. Dipayan.
Hi, my name is Dipayan. I'm a scientist at the Discovery to Innovation Accelerator, and I'll be working on a couple of the projects that we have going on here.
Hi, I'm Bhushan. I'm a co-founder of a company called Papyrus Diagnostics, where we are developing point-of-care diagnostic tools for detection of AMR.
And he's also faculty at IISc.
Yeah, I don't know if it's fit in my one line.
Because of your two profiles, we granted one more line to you.
Hi, I'm Ruturaj. I'm the newest member of the AMR group.
Hi, my name is Janani. I'm one of the founders of a CCAMP incubated company called Biomonitor. We make devices to create low bioburden environments, controlled environments on the fly, like a clean room that you can create wherever you go, just putting a plug and play device.
Swati.
Hi, I'm Swati, and I'm doing programs for AMR at CCAMP.
And we have online also. So if I go ahead and possibly say names, if you don't mind. Chandra, do you want to introduce yourself? Chandra Sainathan. Are we audible there? Yeah. Can you guys hear us?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So Veena, since you have replied, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello. Thank you. Myself, Veena. I'm Chief Scientist of Oxygen Life Sciences Private Limited. We are working in AMR region since 2017. We are developing a sensible and affordable panel for diagnostics of AMR. We are into this field for the last 4-5 years. So we are working with it.
Thank you so much. Chandra?
Yes, Dr. Chandra here. I'm Dr. Chandra Sainathan. I'm an emeritus professor in the Department of Biotechnology, IIT Madras, retired in 2021. I'm also the founder director of a startup called Teevanam Additives and Nutraceuticals Private Limited. And with the help of a big grant from BIRAC, we have been working for the past 5 years on developing beta-glucan, yeast beta-glucan, as a immunomodulator, which reduces the usage of antibiotics in aquaculture, and now we are developing it for human use also. It is supposed to be an immunomodulator of a unique type. This is my background.
Thank you, Professor Chandra. May I come to Jagdish from Adivo? One-liner introduction, please.
Yeah. Hi, this is Jagdish from Adivo. I am the head of R&D at Adivo Diagnostics. And so we are a company involved in developing infection screening devices in non-contact kind of manner. And so the eventual goal of our company is to develop diagnostic interventions to target the grand challenge of AMR.
Thank you, Jagdish. If I may go, Krishna Sri, is it? I think they are also from Adivo.
Yes, sir. Hi, I'm Krishna Sri. I'm microbiologist from Adivo Diagnostics.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Maruddam.
Yeah, this is Samaradam. Basically, I'm a veterinarian running startup in IIT Madras Bioincubator facility, and we are supported by BIRAC, by big and CIPRI grants, and I'm also running a zoonotic disease control program with Melinda Gates and NIH grants.
Thank you, Dr. Maruddam. Dr. Nitin Yadav. Nitin.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Nitin. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, this is Nitin Yadav from Biotide Solutions. We were funded from BIRAC and TCAM under big grant for developing stabilized peptide-based antimicrobials. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin. And we have Dr. Manoj, AlgoBio.
Good morning, everyone. I am the CEO of Algorithmic Biologics and a professor at IIT Bombay. Our company brings scale efficiencies to molecular testing, and specifically for AMR, we are building point-of-use diagnostic panels that will allow fast, sensitive, and affordable AMR diagnosis.
Thank you, Manoj. Dusk Done Innovations.
Yeah, hi, my name is Naveed. I am the founder and the Chief Scientific Officer at Dastan Innovations. We are a startup based in Kashmir where we are working on the animal health. We are working on reducing the antibiotic burden in animal health with replacing them with plant-based alternatives. So we are developing a technology with BIRAC funded project on computer-aided phytotherapy, which helps us rationalize the use of plant-based alternatives in animal health. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for, I think, hopefully it will help to understand whom the audience is broadly. We have someone just joining. Would you be introducing yourself one-liner?
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Akshita. I'm representing Koshki, which is founded by Professor Colin Jamora and his postdoc Tanay Bhatt from Instant. And we are working on developing oligonucleotide therapy for antimicrobial resistance, especially for diabetic skin infections and non-healing wounds. We are trying to modulate our innate mechanism, which can help in release of antimicrobial peptides from the skin using maybe siRNA or antisynthetase. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Great. Just on a lighter note, if you keep using the InStem notebooks, all your Koshki innovations will belong to InStem and not Koshki. I'm just saying, if you keep using that, so you better, ditch it and take it. Sorry.
It's also this
Yes. No, it is important document here. So coming back, I think it's my great pleasure. I'll keep it short to request Francois to share some efforts about the efforts of GARDP, what their broader idea of global efforts, including in India, and how you look to go forward. Dr. Francois leads several efforts at GARDP, including in the new assets, as well as in a broader aspects of, if I'm not wrong, I was just told infectious diseases,
the serious bacterial infection,
and including sepsis and so on. So I think that comes very closer. Several of our efforts, while we have not spoken about, also connect with sepsis, including neonatal sepsis and so on. So I'm sure people who are here, we have a molecule that Paresh hasn't spoken about, which we have just started to have a dialogue with Netherlands company for long, elongating survival post septicemia. Not a it's not a pathogen, but a survival through immunomodulation. So it will be a great way to hear from you. Of course, any words from Subha are also welcome. And then we will take the Indian cookies after that. So over to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're actually going to tag team.
Okay,
so,
good.
yeah.
Good. Share screen. What is the presentation?
Yeah.
Swati?
Yeah, we have to open the
Where is
presentation.
the presentation?
Okay. So I think we have to just, can you request? Yeah. Can you open the presentation, please? Because it's not our computer. We don't know where you have saved.
No, sir, I want to share the screen.
Okay, we'll share from here. She has just stepped out. Do I have permission to touch her computer? Let's see. It's open.
Oh, I see. The share is super.
What is the name?
Okay.
No. No. We have to open. Can you call Swati? Yeah. Okay, sir. You have to open the.
No, this is.
Can you present from the slides that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have?
I can share my screen.
Yeah. That's the one?
Yeah, that is it.
So we will manage it from here.
Okay.
Francois.
Okay.
We'll manage the
Perfect.
slides from here.
Okay.
Because we're presenting from here.
Perfect.
So,
Hello, everybody. I'm Subasree Srinivasan. I'm the medical director at GARP. Just by way of introduction, I am an infectious disease physician. I am based in the US right now. I was educated here in Bangalore. I've been living in the US for a long time. And I worked in pharma and biotech, and then I've been with GARP for 2 years. So that's just by way of my background. And so what I'm going to do is just run through a little bit of what GARP is going to do. Why do we exist? That's really what I'm going to do. And then I'll hand it over to Francois, who will walk through some of our programs and so on that are, we are currently working on. So if we can go to the next slide. I think this audience doesn't need to know, doesn't need introduction on AMR and what it means. But I think it is important to recognize, that the burden of AMR was only recently, really brought out by the Graham study, and this direct deaths of 1.27 million, which is obviously a gross underestimation, but it's somewhere between 5 and 1 million and 5 million deaths per year that we're talking about. And so, and to put that in perspective, relative to cancer or heart disease or HIV, that gets a lot of attention and funding as a result, this is not a small problem. And I think that it's important to understand that. And this is at the global level. Now, once you start talking about specific geographies, I think it's quite different. And for instance, in India, I think this is probably, will move leftward very, very easily.
Yeah.
So if we can have the next slide. And really, without new antibiotics, this 10 million people who are going to die by 2050 was something that was put out there, which again is now we understand as a gross underestimation in two ways, right? I mean, it's not by 2050, it's probably by 2030, at where we are today. And it's probably not 10 million, but some multiple of that. So what we are talking about is really, could be quite catastrophic in terms of human lives, but also in terms of economic terms. I think that's the piece that gets missed by policymakers, and that it could potentially, undermine every other initiative that they are invested in. And you talk about US or Europe, AMR is bad, but yeah, we can manage it here in places like India. I mean, this is here and now. I mean, again, I'm not going to preach to the choir, but that's the reality. And so GODP recognizes this, and really our mission is to bring effective antibiotics to everyone who needs them, and that's our mission. What that means is several things. Antibiotics that are effective in the region that we want to work in, bringing antibiotics to the regions with the highest need that often are neglected, and making sure that they remain effective, and really creating that supply chain that's sustainable. So it's all of those things that are in our mission. If we go to the next slide, again, these are more statistics, and I'll just skip in the interest of time. And really what we do is twofold, right? One is accelerating late stage development of newer and older antibiotics, and I'll get to that older antibiotics in a bit. And then also enabling access. Just developing them is not enough. We recognize that there have been many antibiotics, I was just telling Taslim earlier, that have been approved by either FDA or EMA or both, and only one has reached India thus far. And so we are very conscious of that. And so the intent is that we focus on key geographies to really start bringing some of these antibiotics to the people who need them the most. And of course, India is one of our key, countries that we want to work in. If we go to the next slide, again, this is our vision and mission, and which we have sort of talked about. And next slide, please. So, I'll just walk you through what is our strategy really, and this strategy sort of underpins everything that we do. If we can go to the next slide. So we are trying to build a portfolio and that addresses multiple needs. We start off by looking at the WHO priority pathogens. What has the WHO, or for that matter, India, you have your own priority pathogen list. What is that list? And the reason that you get on that list is A, that you have high levels of AMR, B, that you don't have enough, solutions, and these are highly significant pathogens in that they kill people. And so, that's our starting point. And we get involved with programs that really have been impacted by AMR, not so much, any infection. And I think this is important because, sometimes we get asked, oh, what about, I don't know, why do you not deal with pneumonia, for instance? It is the degree of AMR and the lack of innovation. It's those two pieces that need to come together for us to get involved. And so we have identified at this point two main disease areas that we work in. There's this, sepsis, broadly what we call sepsis, which is community acquired and hospital acquired sepsis. And that is a result of serious bacterial infections, and then sexually transmitted infections. And in that field, it's largely gonorrhea that we're talking, drug-resistant gonorrhea that we're talking about. What is also important to realize is that we prioritize pathogens, but then we prioritize patients, and then we prioritize age groups and so on. And in that regard, the other big age group that's neglected in many ways are children, and particularly newborns. And so they, again, have been really impacted by AMR because often there's not enough development done that is tailored to children to get them the right doses that are effective but also safe, or they're done in a way that is not relevant to geographies such as India. And then lastly, priority geographies where, I think Graham has sort of shown us where the hotspots of AMR are. And exactly that's where we work in. So in addition to India, I mean, South Africa is another big hub, and we work with, through South Africa, we work with, a lot of the African region, in a big way. We also have a hub in Thailand, and so, work with the Far East as well. We are working closely with the WHO European region for the Eastern European region, which is also highly impacted by AMR. And then lastly, the South American region, Latin America and South America. So, but right now our main focus is on India and South Africa. That's where we start, and then we sort of progress to other geographies. Next slide. So these are our programs right now. So we have, sort of concert with what the disease area strategy is. We have children's antibiotics, which is a broad program, essentially serving children. It could be newer antibiotics that are being developed for children in partnership with innovator companies. Or it could be, taking up public health issues such as neonatal sepsis and really understanding what could we do to make that, impact that space. Serious bacterial infections is essentially sort of a cluster that includes a lot of infections, mostly hospital-acquired infections, but we will start to also get into community-acquired infections. And when we say serious bacterial infections, what we mean is infectious syndromes that then become, that lead to hospitalization and potentially lead to sepsis and death. And so it is pneumonias, hospital-acquired pneumonias, hospital UTIs, bacteremias, and so on. So it's all of those things. And then sexually transmitted infections, as I said, is basically gonorrhea. And then we have an effort in discovery and exploratory research, which is not a huge effort, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We do sort of really focus on late-stage development. That's our core area. Most recently, what we have also started doing is looking at access pathways and so on. I mean, like I said, that needs to be part of the solution. And in fact, we now have one antibiotic that Francois will talk about, where we essentially are only providing access. We're not really developing it. Maybe we'll do some work in the regions, but it's an approved antibiotic. And then lastly, we have this kind of broader, interest, which is in preserving the sharing scientific knowledge, which is through our Revive platform that many of you might have actually already been part of, talks or listening to talks. And that mandate there is really to nurture the antibiotic development ecosystem. Next slide. So this is our portfolio. So like I said, we have two big clusters, sepsis and STIs, and sepsis is hospital and community acquired infections, and really goes across the board in terms of all of the populations. And then you see the priority pathogens, carbapenem-resistant pathogens, as well as ESBL. And then you see, our portfolio right now, which I won't go into too much detail because, in fact, Francois will talk a little bit more about this. And as you can see, there are some that are gaps. We have already identified that those are priority areas for us. There's a gap for Acinetobacter. And then there's a gap. I mean, we have one asset that's being developed for drug-resistant gonorrhea, but there's still a gap because there are issues that are not addressed adequately by that pathogen, by that drug. And so here we have our 5 by 25 goal, which is really having 5 drugs that will be, that are useful to the regions that we are serving. Next slide. So this is just another way of looking at it. This is our portfolio here. And, in sepsis, we have serious bacterial infections. And then we have, like I said, children's antibiotics sort of is in both of those clusters. We have neonatal sepsis, which is a separate cluster, given that neonatal sepsis is quite a different disease and quite a different public health problem. And so, we have then the new drugs that you can see, cefepime, taniborbactam, is the first one that we're working on, and that's in partnership with Venatorix based in the US. And then we have the cefiderocol access project that is working with Shionogi. And then we have those gaps that I talked about. And then we come to neonatal sepsis, which is essentially looking at better use of older drugs, so often in combinations, for empiric treatment of neonatal sepsis, and trying to convince the WHO to change their guideline from ampicillin and gentamicin. And so that is a big program that's ready to launch, next month. And then in the SDI section, we have, gonorrhea, and we have the zoliflodacin drug project, but then we have some gaps in some of these other areas, as you can see there. So this is, sort of in a nutshell, this is our portfolio and what we aspire to do. Next slide. And I won't dwell on this. I mean, essentially that these are the big clusters of, activities that need to happen. Just to say that evidence generation is a big part of what we do. And what we believe is that you need to demonstrate effectiveness in the region that you're going to use the drug, and provide the evidence that's necessary to sort of change the guidance in the local area to help policymakers really understand the value of antibiotics and so on. And underpinning all of these is antibiotic stewardship, and it's part of everything that we do. Every decision that's made takes into account, is this the best thing for antibiotic stewardship? Next slide. And here, I talked a little bit about this. These are the various originator companies that we partner with today. And as you can see, it's a broad range of players, and in return, what we get are commercialization rights in many countries. As you can see, a lot of these are low and middle income countries, and that's kind of our business model. Next slide. Okay, I think this is where I'll hand over to to you.
So this is to summarize more or less the main. Well, first let me just introduce myself a little bit. So I'm François Franceschi. I have been with GARP for 4.5 years. And I have been working now in antibiotic discovery and development for the last 35 years or something. First in academia, then in industry, then with the US government, and now with GARP. So has been antibiotics all the way. Some of the highlights. So in the children antibiotic program, as Sue mentioned, there we have identified 3 potential combination treatments for neonatal sepsis, and that was done. One of the things, I will get a little bit more in depth into the programs afterwards, so I'm just gonna save the details for that. So we are planning to launch a public health clinical trial. That's what Sue mentioned about the empiric treatment of neonatal sepsis. And we have also pediatric studies and new antibiotics, these more advanced antibiotics we are working with. A big part of GARP is to say we want to accelerate the pediatric development, because that normally is left for the last second, sometimes happens very slowly, and we are trying to accelerate that. In the serious bacterial infections, we have a new antibiotic, Suba mentioned, cefepime taniborbactam. It's a combination of a beta-lactam with a beta-lactamase inhibitor that is supposed to have effectivity against these metallo-beta-lactamases, that NDM, the New Delhi beta-lactamase, the BIM, it doesn't have activity against IMP. But it's say, better version of Avicaz, which doesn't have activity against metallos. And the other is an approved antibiotic treatment. This is cefiderocol, where we are doing the access and maybe some evidence generation of evidence. And in the sexually transmitted infections, we have the gonorrhea program in the very last stage of the phase 3 pivotal trial. In the next slide. So yeah, that's the 3 potential combination treatments for neonatal sepsis. To enable that work also, we had a observational study. Part of it was happening here in India and a couple of hospitals in India, but it was 11 countries, 3,200 newborns. And then we also did a lot of preclinical work trying to figure out, are there any antibiotics out there that are already approved and that already have a neonatal indication that we can somehow combine to get a better chance to these children to survive, because ampicillin gentamicin doesn't work almost anywhere now. In a few places in Africa, maybe it still works, but outside from there is very difficult because ESBLs mainly. And so we got 3 different antibiotics, amikacin, fosomycin, and flomoxef. Flomoxef is second generation cephalosporin, but it's only approved in India, in Japan, China, Taiwan, and South Korea. And it was approved in the 80s, and it has been used there, but it has really excellent activity against ESBLs. And so by combining it with amikacin and fosomycin, we did a lot of hollow fiber work. Then we came up to say, okay, this definitely merits to be studied in the clinic. And that's what's going to happen with this big public health trial that is going to have. It's also going to be a novel design, one of these so-called basket designs where you have multiple arms, different routes of escalation, because we thought that just doing a simple comparator trial, that was not going to bring it, especially because different regions will need different type of treatment. And and the other one is, of course, as I mentioned before, so the new antibiotics, cefidrochol and cefepime-taniborbactam. We are in the case of cefepime-taniborbactam, GARP is leading the whole pediatric development and trying to accelerate that as much as we can. The next slide. Yeah.
We accelerate the pace of things so that people can ask questions, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, what is it okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, and please interrupt me anytime. Yeah. So anytime you have a question, just interrupt me. So in the serious bacterial infections already mentioned, we have the cefepime-taniborbactam. We have cefidrochol, which is mostly an access activity, meaning GARP has the right for 135 low and medium income countries. And the reason we are right now here in India is because the third point is an observational study of priority pathogens in hospitalized patients. So we have 11 sites across India and South Africa. This is going to be an observational study just to do a little bit of feasibility and prospective study of how are those patients being treated, how are they being diagnosed, what are the outcomes, are the labs well equipped to handle those patients, and so on. So, and the idea is to prepare the terrain for a future interventional trial where we take then one of those new antibiotics and then try to show that they really work against multi-drug resistant infections, including, for example, metallo-beta-lactamases, because a lot of times that information is not generated or generated. I mean, if you try to do a trial like this in Europe or the US, you may need to recruit 100 patients to find one. Here in India or in South Africa, you have the burden. So it's then the place where you definitely should do it, because this is the countries that were benefit the most from those type of new antibiotics.
So Francois, just a question, since you allowed that to happen. I think that first thing is really terrific, where you're looking at the new development completely. Let's say if we come to the second point, like cefidrochol, right, where you're saying that you would allow access to the LMICs, 135 odd. So the arrangement is that GARP will then work with local manufacturers by giving them the license to manufacture and sell. Would that be the arrangement? How is it?
Yeah, well, I don't think we will have a lot of different local manufacturers,
Sure.
but we will have probably a central one that will supply the drug for GARP, because again, these drugs are not supposed to be high volume drugs. But in fact, there was a request for proposals that went out to find out who could manufacture that. I would say most probably it's going to be an Indian manufacturer, the one who is going to do that. And that will then produce the drug also in a more cost-effective way. Because, I mean, that drug in the US, it costs a lot. I mean, per vial, I mean, you cannot pay that. And so what we want, part of the access is also manufactured in a way that will make it accessible for the people who need it, and not only for the rich people who can afford paying, I don't know, $10,000 for a treatment.
Yeah. But to answer his question, I mean, it's not just manufacturing, so we would probably have some license.
Okay. Okay.
Who would be marketing authorization
Okay.
holders?
Oh, got it.
And which would be which could be regional. It could be global.
It could be global.
Depending on who the partner is.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
And a lot of, I will talk a little bit more about cefiderocol afterwards, but then the next one. The sexually transmitted infections, as you know, I mean, in many parts of the world, you are seeing more and more this so-called supergonorrhea that is resistant to ceftriaxone and is very difficult to treat. So soliflodacin is a novel class of antibiotic. We are running a phase 3 trial in 16 sites in 5 countries to evaluate soliflodacin, which is an oral treatment. The other program with the current treatment, ceftriaxone, is an injectable. So then you have a lot of problems with people that, I mean, it's a lot more complicated, etc. In the case of an oral drug that will be effective, then you could also make a lot easier to treat the partners and etc. So this phase 3 trial is about to finish enrollment at the beginning of next year. And then hopefully that will lead eventually to the approval of the drug for gonorrhea.
This was the very first program that GARP got into. So this is like we ran the actual
phase 3 trial.
Phase 3.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So GARP has been in control of the whole trial.
And these are the sites for the trial?
Yeah, these are the sites for the trial. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And in fact, the manufacturing also was in the hands of GARP and is being Dr. Reddy's. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, now it's in. Yeah.
Correct.
Next slide. This is just to, I'm not going to talk about this very briefly only. As Sue mentioned, there is a very small effort on discovery and exploratory research at GARP. I mean, I would say 90% of the activities of GARP at most at the late stage clinical development. We sometimes go down and try to de-risk an asset to say, okay, maybe we can solve this problem now, try to figure out if that's going to move forward or not. But then there is also a small effort on trying to look at small molecules, natural products, underexploited targets or undeveloped agents that is kind of in-house with collaborators, mostly outside, of course, of GARP. But it's just trying to look, for example, at libraries that were never screened for antimicrobial activity. And some companies in Japan have said, here, have the library, screen it if you want.
Yeah.
And then it's just try to find out, is there any chemical matter there that is novel? Because, I mean, the problem with antibiotic discovery also is that a lot of the antibiotics that are always coming is another beta-lactam, another beta-lactamase inhibitor, another quinolone, or whatever it is. It's more like incremental, but very little is happening in a very novel class. I mean, one example is Bockworks, of course, that have something new, truly new, that is not just a meat drug. Next slide. Yeah, and I mean, that's the same thing. So they have screened about 100,000 compounds on extracts. They are exploring some series of targets, and they are building a global network of partners, including screening facilities like, for example, the Pasteur Institute in Korea and some other places. The next slide. Yeah, accelerating access. That's, I guess we have talked about that. So that's a major issue. I mean, a major goal for GARP access, because I mean that's, as Suba was saying, from all those antibiotics that have been approved by the FDA and MDA since 2000. One is here in India. In many places in Africa, they don't have anything approved. I mean, sometimes take 18 years to get it to those countries, and that's unacceptable. The next slide. Yeah, this is a FERICO project. Again, it's just a little bit more in detail saying.
I think this sort of will help.
Yeah, exactly.
You understand what an access project is.
Exactly, the access project on manufacturing, registration, implementation, and guidelines. And in the next slide, it just shows a little bit more about how those. Yeah, exactly. So that essentially every step is a potential stewardship lever, because we are going to try to be involved on all those activities so that those drugs are used properly. Because I mean, the other problem is if you have a drug like that and you don't use it properly, you're going to lose it really quick. And so the idea is to be involved and have an effort on a stewardship and proper usage, etc.
Yeah, and so that's where the diagnostic, and we can discuss more. But that's where, while we directly do not work with diagnostics, diagnostics are critical to our success, and we recognize that. And then so that's where that sort of builds in.
Exactly, especially for the newer antibiotics. Is fundamental to have good diagnostics, because I mean, otherwise you will be just misusing the drug. If you could have treated that with an antibiotic that was, say, 3 levels down, and you end up using that antibiotic, you are increasing the risk. Completely. And that's why diagnostics are fundamental to keep those antibiotics alive for longer. The next slide, and we're almost at the end. Yeah, this is also another secure, which is a joint initiative between WHO, GARP, and with support from UNICEF and Clinton Health Initiative, that is essentially to secure and seeks to accelerate access to a portfolio of essential antibiotics and to ensure their sustainable use. I mean, and that's not only a problem, say, of the LMICs. Even in high-income countries, sometimes you have antibiotic shortages, and it's more a supply chain issue. A lot of antibiotics, they are very cheap. You need dedicated facilities. So a lot of people at some point decides, I don't want to do this anymore. It's not profitable anymore, and those then create a lot of problems also in LMICs when you don't have access to basic antibiotics. And so this secure initiative is going to have a 4-year pilot that is going to expect to launch beginning of next year in some countries as pilot countries, and it's just going to try to take care of this issue of antibiotic supply.
I think this is going to be, I mean, if it takes off, I think it will be a huge, improvement in securing that gap.
Equity everywhere.
Exactly. That in one word, that's what it is.
Exactly. And I guess we are almost at the end. Yes. That's it. So, and these are all the funders.
This is to demonstrate that we work only in partnerships. I mean, we ourselves are tiny comparatively, compared to the portfolio. So, if you go to a drug company and say you have a portfolio of 5 drugs, that's a large, at least a mid-sized company. That's not who we are, but we do a lot of the work, but it's always in partnership, and that's our kind of fundamental way of that we work.
And most of the funders of GARP are essentially governments.
Yes, essentially. I mean, you see a few foundations there, but it's essentially public money.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think we are open for questions. Either online or here. Online, can we ask online quickly if there are any questions for Francois or Suba? I have a couple, so I will step in for now. Paresh has one, so I'll let Paresh get it here.
So most of the work that you have shown right now are related to small molecules, which are direct antibiotics. which may be the further development where people have run decks of libraries to find new molecules.
Yeah.
But the newer approaches like siRNAs or indirect approaches, which are through immunomodulation, like some of the startups talked about, even the sepsis work that Taslim mentioned, are can those kind of combinations of interest through GARDP, where a molecule of existing, which may be having some functionality combined with others as an approach. And second question is, at what stage GARDP would engage with a company or an academic group? At what level? Of this topic?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at our disease area strategy, we define our work by the disease area, not so much by the technology.
Right.
And so to answer your question, absolutely. I mean, we're not right now, what is out there is small molecules. And that's why we work with small molecules, but that we're not restricted in any way. You know,
Any
that's
functional therapies.
yeah, I mean that we'll only work with small molecules. That's definitely not what we're saying. Your answer your second question. I mean, technically, I mean we start working with companies at proof of concept or so, but really get involved with the late stage development. So you know, maybe phase 2,
Phase
maybe
2, yeah.
or phase 3, and beyond. But having said that, you know, we just funded BugWorks for something that is fairly early. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, as Suba said, we try to engage or say hard engagement is probably phase 2 and upwards. But just the example of BugWorks, they were running a phase 1 in Australia, and there was one characteristic of this molecule that was a risk. And then we decided, we had some funding from the Australian government. They said, you maybe should spend this money in Australia. So it was like the perfect marriage. There is BugWorks doing this in Australia. There is this money we need to spend in Australia. It's a good combination here. And then we said, why you don't include in your phase 1 this study that could de-risk the molecule? And then we just put money there in the phase 1. But as Suba said, I mean, we are also, there is a lot of expertise in GARDP from people who has been working in antibiotics for a long time. And a lot of companies sometimes come to us to talk for, I mean, they are in early discovery or whatever. And we just essentially provide advice and said, oh, maybe you think about this, or you should think about that. Or sometimes, I mean, I had a lot of contact with the people at the NIH in the US. They have a lot of preclinical services that they offer for free, for example, and they are open to anywhere in the world, as long as you have something interesting. So a lot of times we are just like matchmakers and said like, hey, you know what, you should talk to these people and they could run this animal model for you so that you can then have something in your hand to apply for a carbex scan, for example, or whatever. And so it's a lot of, I don't know, community engagement, but the hard engagement normally happens when the companies are already in phase 2. And again, GARDP is not per se a funder. GARDP is a partner.
Correct.
And I think that's the key.
And that's the key. It's not that we just said, hey, here's the money, just do whatever you want. It's more like, we are going to take charge of some of the stuff you're doing, and we also want something in return. And that something in return is mostly, we want the rights for LMICs, for example, so that we can guarantee that if that works, then those countries will have access to this.
Yeah, and then to take it to, you know, how we might, why are we talking to CCAM, for instance, you know, and I think at this stage, I think it's more about what Francois said, you know, just providing expertise that's needed, or feasibility and of what you're doing, but doesn't preclude that we might get involved, you know, a lot more in depth, you know, down the road with a particular company. So.
And I mean, sorry.
Yeah, so we are developing some anti-infectives which are biologicals. So they are antibody-based, antibody drug conjugates. And my impression has been that, so we have been sending, you know, like one-page write-ups to companies and all people are interested in. So feedback I get from them, my impression is they are looking for small molecules which are cheap to produce, which can be given orally. So they are, for neonatal sepsis, for example. So we have a Gates Foundation grant. We have developed some diagnostics. So we can also use those molecules for, control of Pseudomonas or some infections. So that's the problem I'm facing. My impression is, people are not very receptive to molecules that are can be used for critical care medicine because the market is probably not that huge, as opposed to molecules that can be given orally.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think market size cannot drive antibiotic development anymore. And that's the reason we are in the situation we are. And that's why people like RP, need to exist to sort of ensure that it's not just a market-driven phenomenon. Antibiotics antibiotics broadly are a public good. I mean, if you don't have functioning antibiotics, the foundation of medicine is going to fall off. And so that's the key. And I think it depends on who you're talking to. If you talk to people like Carbex or people like that, you won't hear any of that because they understand. I mean, that's why they are in business as well.
Yeah, they supported the program. So we did some studies in NIAID, like you were saying. So that
Yeah, excellent. I am still checking if online questions are there. I wanted to give them a chance to come in. Dr. Chandra?
Yes, I have a question. I was listening with interest. Now, some of the latest concept is for more efficient drug delivery. So do we have any chance to get funded for improving the drug delivery by encapsulation of some of the drugs, particularly even some of the insoluble drugs, which are micronized in suitable vehicles, which we are into the research on that. Is that of interest to Gargi?
I think it's a novel concept. I mean, the way I look at it is that we are interested not just in new antibiotics or new chemical entities, as to put it very broadly, but also in better use of entities that exist currently. And so I sort of put this in that bucket. And if you can, it also goes to stewardship, that you deliver the highest exposure to that antibiotic at the site of the infection.
Yes.
And which is what this delivery system would go for. So it sort of falls in our general bucket of things. And again, like I said, we haven't boxed ourselves into one particular technology. We really are looking at it very broadly, and but we want it to impact in these areas. And so that's how we approach it. So nothing is included. But again, we would need to sort of understand, what the business model would be of that particular company or whatever. And again, we don't fund, we partner. And I think that those are the things to keep in mind.
So to just sort of picking up on that whole partnership thing, right? I think for a lot of people who are looking at sort of new concepts, not necessarily therapy which fits into an existing funding, use, trial sort of system, the partnership becomes very important because you're getting feedback on whether something like that would be acceptable or not. And that's something we struggle with a lot. So we put these devices which will help create these environments, and now we're using them in hospitals for prevention of infections. For example, if you didn't actually have an isolation room, which you're able to create it with this kind of a thing. But setting up the studies that you need to set up to actually show clinical relevance across multiple sites for small companies sitting where you are, that becomes a very, very difficult thing to do. So, I mean,
and so that goes to what Francois was saying. We often, I'll let Francois do it because he does all of the work.
Yeah, no, I mean, often, exactly. I mean, sometimes, especially small companies, they start developing something, and sometimes they don't check with the end user. Let's say, is this gonna fly or not? And then GARPI has a lot of people that has been working in industry or in academia or whatever, developing antibiotics for a long time. So in a sense, we kind of like to spread that brain trust and said, hey, maybe you should think about this or that, or that is not going to be feasible according to our understanding. I mean, you can always challenge us and we will be happy to be challenged. But sometimes is these small things that then people goes through to a street that is not going to go anywhere because just nobody was telling them like maybe you should turn left.
Yeah.
Correct.
Is there a platform? How does one engage in that kind of conversation?
I mean,
You email Francois.
exactly. We have been struggling with that a little bit in the sense of trying to figure out is this a way of doing this more formal, let's say, but essentially it's very informal. It's essentially just contacting one of us and say, hey, we would like to have a conversation with you guys. And then we try to see, okay, what is this about? And then we try to assemble the right group of people and then organize a 1-hour teleconference and at least exchange ideas. And
that will be very helpful. Very helpful.
So just to give you a perspective, no, just to add to what Francois is saying. So we have another company which is a spin-off from from campus here, CCAM itself, which had a conversation with you about a couple of years back, more or less, which is for rapid diagnostics, AST and so on. And I think the idea was clear that while we are not a diagnostics oriented, thing, but it would help significantly when we want to have a tool which can allow our test of antibiotics with early detection and early AST.
Yeah.
So the larger package where you can fit in the diagnostics and the antibiotic trial itself.
Yeah.
And how that makes a huge differential.
Sure.
Rather than not having a rapid AST
Yeah.
is also a huge difference. And that kind of packaging of a program is possible in a way.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things we were discussing before briefly was that eventually GARPI will be also running some interventional trials.
Correct.
And one of the things that, for example, limits a lot of diagnostic developers is access to the right sample.
Yeah.
And so if at some point we are running one of these trials and we know what the requirements are, then we could maybe try to put that inside so that we will be able to say share some of those samples for diagnostic development, because that's one of the things that a lot of times the developers are just creating a mock sample based on something that maybe doesn't reflect really what is the real sample.
Absolutely. I think question is there, so I don't want to miss her out. Dr. Maratham, you had a question?
Yes, sir. Actually, my concern is that antibiotic-resistant bacteria originating in animals also, which also spreads to humans but it's neglected, I think so, because antibiotic used for treating major problems in veterinary, such as mastitis, enterometritis, and also included in animal feeds as supplements. But is this forum is interested in developing a diagnostic kit to detect an antibiotic residue in food chain before it goes for human consumption? This is one major concern for me. And I also have another concern, since it is a major chance of misuse of antibiotics in animals, because it's difficult for the farmer to bring the animal to the veterinary dispensary continuously for the entire course of antibiotic treatment, because even a single day is an important income for him. So most of the time it's a misuse is happening here.
Yeah.
And is it an interest of the forum to develop an antibiotic alternates, especially to prevent and treat animal diseases and in animal feed supplements? That's
I think this is a huge problem and very under-recognized issue, in terms of the impact on human health that happens because of the impact on agriculture and animal husbandry. And so the One Health concept exists and so on. Right now, GARPI is really focused on human health. That's not to say that it will stay that way, but right now that's our focus. And really what we aim to do is to make sure that the agents that we are working in are only, earmarked for human health and that they will never be used for animal health. That's part of our stewardship, measures. Yeah, I mean, we don't work directly in other areas right now.
Yeah, I mean, we recognize the problem, and
Yeah.
and part of the activities of GARP is also on the policy making side. So we are in contact with the One Health people, and we recognize, I mean, 80% of the antibiotics produced in the world are used in animals, not in humans.
Yeah.
So and it's not only the residues in the meat, or whatever product that comes out of the agriculture or so, it's also, but that the resistance that is generated and then at some point comes into the soil or water or something, and then it's transmitted to humans. So we recognize it's a big problem, but I mean, GARP, that's the other thing. GARP is very small.
We have to sort of.
We have to pick our battles,
Yeah.
and also, I mean, the funding we have. I mean, we would like to have 10 times more funds than we have right now. So it's a matter of trying to
make sense.
Yeah.
I know the time is, but so at least for the people who are on the room, we will have tea, and over tea we can continue that. But we have a couple of questions from Dr. Chandra. If you can make it brief, Dr. Chandra.
Yes, I'll make it very brief. I have just 2 questions to be clarified. One is that you talked about the partnership. So what kind of help will be extended to small startup like ours? Second question is, when we do this kind of research on drug delivery, as Madam mentioned, targeted drug delivery to macrophages or to on-site with certain suitable carriers, which are also immunomodulators. At our level of startups, I believe we are able to go up only up to cell line and animal model studies. So how should it be carried forward, for any further proof of the concept in humans or animals? Will there be a different kind of funding for that?
Not really. I mean, as I said, we engage with companies normally when they are in phase 2. There is other funders out there that normally, like say, CARB-X will bring people to phase 1, to the end of phase 1. So the environment, let's say, the need is so big that we don't want to compete also with funders that fund in that space.
Correct.
So that's why we just try to stay on the late clinical development. So for a small company that is just on the early stages, the only thing we can do is maybe to provide some advice, but
or
connect
them in the right direction,
connect them with the right partner or something, but not really GARP. We don't have the bandwidth to do that.
Makes sense.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
We'll have a very quick question from you since you have raised it, but then we'll go down. Yeah.
I don't know if it's a quick question, but I want to know more about your strategy for preclinical research, because that also, I guess, takes a lot of effort and time, but you are more or less invested into late development. So how is that, like, what is the strategy in terms of doing something in-house and then partnering with other companies to maybe, let's say, to a phase 1, phase 2, or is that something in the future you want to go into an early stage development?
No, well, I'd let you.
No. I mean, so just to clarify, are you talking about the preclinical work that we are involved with?
Yes.
So we are actually very careful to only work in areas that nobody else is working in. I mean, so that it's never a competitive space. And whether we will take it forward ourselves, whether we'll partner with somebody else, I think that's TBD at this point. I mean, the discovery effort, as you know, is a long process, right? And it's not a de novo discovery, but it's really just coming from existent libraries. And so it could be, that we develop everything ourselves, but it could also be that we, partner with somebody else. Yeah. So it's
an ongoing discussion, but first of all, something has to come up
Yes,
that we
exactly.
say
And
is
then
worth it. And we are far away from that. But the idea is, yeah, I mean, at GARPI doesn't have any single lab, okay?
Yeah.
So it will be only through partners or
It will always be partnerships.
it will always be partnerships, yeah.
Great. Maybe we can talk later,
Yeah,
because we
sure.
are involved in preclinical drug discovery.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think with that, please join me to thank both François and Subha. Thank you all who are online for joining us. I know you are from different parts of the country, but thank you joining us. And hopefully next time we will have we'll have more time to call you up here and stay more with us. Thank you all for joining. Yeah, thank you both. We'll go down for a coffee now, I feel.
Okay.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.